The autumn sun was setting over the city skyline as Special Agent Thompson stepped out of First National Bank. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement as she walked, her mind still processing the details from the 3-hour meeting she'd just wrapped up. As one of the FBI's top cybercrime investigators, she had been tracking a series of sophisticated bank heists that had cost financial institutions millions. The meeting had gone well. She had gotten the information she needed about suspicious transactions that could help crack the case. Her dark blue suit was crisp despite the long day, her badge securely clipped to her belt, and her briefcase held vital documents that could break the investigation wide open. As she walked toward her car in the parking lot, something caught her attention. The reflection in a store window showed a police cruiser moving slowly behind her, following her path. She didn't think much of it at first. This was a busy part of downtown, and police patrols were common. But then she noticed the cruiser was matching her pace, creeping along just a little too deliberately. Agent Thompson had been in law enforcement long enough to read situations, and her instincts were telling her something wasn't right. She continued walking normally, maintaining her professional composure while discreetly checking her surroundings in the window reflections. The cruiser's lights weren't on, but it was definitely tailing her. She could see the officer inside watching her intently. Officer Reed, as she would later learn his name, had been with the department for 12 years and had a history of complaints that had been quietly buried in the system. He saw what he wanted to see: a well-dressed black woman walking away from a bank at closing time. The fact that she moved with confidence and carried a briefcase only reinforced his prejudiced assumptions. Agent Thompson reached for her car keys, her hand steady despite the tension building in her shoulders. The sound of a car door opening behind her confirmed what she'd suspected was coming. She heard heavy footsteps approaching, accompanied by the subtle sound of gear shifting on a utility belt. "Stop right there." The command rang out sharply across the parking lot, drawing the attention of several passers-by who slowed to watch the scene unfold. Officer Reed's voice carried an edge of aggression that was completely unnecessary for the situation. Agent Thompson stopped, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Years of FBI training kicked in as she assessed her options. She could feel her heart beating faster, but her face remained calm and professional. This wasn't her first encounter with prejudice in law enforcement, but something about Officer Reed's approach told her this one was different. She began to turn slowly, her FBI credentials already in hand. The last rays of sunlight caught the golden badge at her hip, but Officer Reed's tunnel vision had already decided what he was seeing. His hand was resting on his weapon as he closed the distance between them, his face set in a mask of unwarranted suspicion. The evening traffic continued to flow by on the street, oblivious to the tension mounting in the parking lot. A small crowd had begun to gather at a safe distance, some already pulling out their phones to record what was happening. The air felt heavy with the weight of what was about to unfold, as two very different perspectives of law enforcement were about to collide in a way that would send ripples through the entire department. Agent Thompson took a slow, deep breath. She had no way of knowing it yet, but this moment would become a turning point, not just for her career, but for the entire conversation about reform in law enforcement. As she prepared to identify herself, she held onto her years of training and experience. Whatever happened next, she would handle it with the professionalism and dignity that had earned her position at the FBI. The sun dipped lower behind the city buildings, casting long shadows across the scene. What should have been a routine end to a productive workday was about to become something much more significant. The next few minutes would change everything, not just for Agent Thompson and Officer Reed, but for an entire system that desperately needed to change. "I said don't move." Officer Reed's voice cut through the evening air as Agent Thompson carefully held up her FBI credentials. The badge and ID card caught the fading sunlight, clearly displaying her photo and federal status. "I'm a federal agent," she said calmly, her voice steady and professional. "I'm currently conducting an investigation at this bank." Officer Reed's response was immediate and aggressive. "Yeah, right. Put those fake credentials down and get on your knees. His hand gripped his weapon tighter, his face twisted with disbelief and something darker. A prejudice that no badge or qualification could overcome in his mind. The small crowd of onlookers had grown larger now. Some people whispered among themselves, others held their phones up to record the unfolding scene. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Agent Thompson could feel the rough pavement through her suit pants as she was forced to kneel, maintaining her dignity even as Officer Reed made a show of the situation. "I'm going to reach for my phone," she announced clearly, making each movement slow and deliberate. "My supervisor can verify my identity." But before she could reach for it, Officer Reed roughly grabbed her arms, pulling them behind her back. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into her wrists as he tightened them unnecessarily hard. Looking real professional with those fake credentials and that fancy suit, Officer Reed sneered, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Bet you thought you were pretty clever, walking out of that bank like you owned the place." His words dripped with prejudice, each syllable revealing more about his own biases than anything about the woman he was wrongfully detaining. A young bank employee who had witnessed Agent Thompson's earlier meeting tried to intervene. "Officer, she was here for a legitimate meeting. I can verify." But Officer Reed cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Stay back. This is a police matter." The bank employee looked helplessly at Agent Thompson, who gave him a slight nod. She knew that his attempt to help, while appreciated, could be documented later as evidence. The heat from the pavement seeped through her clothes as Officer Reed made her wait, deliberately drawing out the humiliation. He spoke into his radio, describing her as a robbery suspect, his voice carrying an undertone of satisfaction. Agent Thompson kept her face neutral, but her mind was racing, documenting every word, every action, every witness who could later testify to what was unfolding. "My credentials are genuine," she stated again, her voice clear and unwavering. "You're making a serious mistake that could cost you your badge." Instead of giving her words any consideration, Officer Reed laughed dismissively. He picked up her fallen briefcase, rifling through official FBI documents with careless hands. The sun had nearly set now, and the streetlights were flickering to life. Their harsh glow created dramatic shadows across the scene, like nature itself was setting the stage for this moment of injustice. Cars slowed as they passed, drivers craning their necks to watch. Some stopped completely, adding to the growing crowd of witnesses. Through it all, Agent Thompson maintained her composure. Years of training and experience had taught her that this moment, though painful and humiliating, needed to be handled with professional restraint. Each second was being recorded, each action would be scrutinized, and her responses would speak volumes about both her character and the larger issues at play. "Stand up," Officer Reed finally commanded, roughly pulling her to her feet. "We're going to sort this out down at the station." As he led her toward his patrol car, Agent Thompson caught the eyes of several witnesses. She saw anger, sympathy, and disbelief on their faces. She also saw phones recording, capturing every detail of this incident. Though she was the one in handcuffs, she knew that truth and justice would eventually prevail. The patrol car's door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing with a finality that seemed to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As Officer Reed got into the driver's seat, Agent Thompson sat straight and tall in the back, her dignity intact despite the circumstances. This confrontation was far from over, and its implications would reach far beyond this one evening in a bank parking lot. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as Officer Reed paraded Agent Thompson through the busy hallway. Other officers looked up from their desks, some with curiosity, others with obvious discomfort at the sight of a well-dressed professional woman in handcuffs. The click of her heels against the linoleum floor echoed through the station, marking each step of this humiliating walk. "Got a bank robbery suspect here," Officer Reed announced loudly, puffing up with unearned pride. "Caught her trying to pass herself off as an FBI agent." He yanked Agent Thompson's credentials from his pocket, waving them dismissively. A few veteran officers exchanged worried glances. They'd seen enough real federal badges to recognize authentic ones. One of the desk sergeants, a woman with 20 years of experience, stepped forward. "Maybe we should verify her credentials first," she suggested carefully. Standard protocol for anyone claiming federal status. But Officer Reed wasn't having any of it. His face flushed red with anger at having his judgment questioned. "I know what I'm doing," he snapped, pushing past the sergeant. "This is my arrest. I'll handle it my way." He steered Agent Thompson toward the holding cells, his grip unnecessarily tight on her arm. The sergeant watched them go, then quietly picked up her phone, her conscience not allowing her to stay silent. In the holding area, Officer Reed finally removed the handcuffs, roughly pushing Agent Thompson into a cell. "Make yourself comfortable," he sneered. "You'll be here a while." The cell door clanged shut with a metallic finality that echoed through the empty room. Agent Thompson rubbed her wrists where the handcuffs had left marks. She looked directly at Officer Reed through the bars. "I want my phone call," she stated firmly. "It's my right, and you know it." For a moment, Officer Reed looked like he might refuse, but even he knew he couldn't deny this basic right without serious consequences. "Fine," he growled, leading her to the phone mounted on the wall. "Make it quick." What he didn't know was that Agent Thompson had already planned her move carefully. As soon as she picked up the receiver, her fingers flew across the keypad, setting up a three-way call that would change everything. Within minutes, she had both her FBI supervisor and the police department's internal affairs division on the line. Her voice was clear and professional as she detailed everything that had happened, from the initial profiling to the current situation. Officer Reed's face strained of color as he realized what she was doing, but it was too late to stop it. Meanwhile, the desk sergeant's earlier phone call had set other wheels in motion. The police chief had been notified, and suddenly the station was buzzing with activity. Officer Reed disappeared briefly, heading to the evidence room where the body camera footage was stored. His fingers trembled as he tried to access the deletion controls, not realizing that every keystroke was being logged. The holding area began filling with activity. Officers who had been avoiding the situation now appeared, their faces serious. Through the commotion, Agent Thompson remained composed, watching as the story she had known would unfold began taking shape. Security footage from the bank had already been pulled up on multiple screens in the station. It clearly showed Agent Thompson in her earlier meeting, her FBI credentials clearly displayed as she conducted official business. The bank manager had called, confirming her identity and the purpose of her visit. The carefully constructed false narrative that Officer Reed had built was crumbling around him. In the chief's office upstairs, phones were ringing nonstop. News of an FBI agent being wrongfully arrested was spreading like wildfire through law enforcement channels. The videos taken by witnesses in the parking lot had already started appearing on social media, drawing immediate public attention. Agent Thompson could hear the increasing chaos outside her cell, the raised voices, the hurried footsteps. She knew that within minutes, this whole situation would explode into something much bigger than Officer Reed had ever anticipated. His actions, driven by prejudice and arrogance, were about to shine a spotlight on issues that went far beyond this one incident. Through it all, she maintained her dignified composure. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever faced similar discrimination, but lacked the authority or resources to fight back. As she heard more footsteps approaching her cell, she straightened her suit jacket and prepared for what would come next. The real story was just beginning to unfold. The police station erupted into chaos as two black SUVs screeched to a halt outside. The FBI had arrived. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway as the FBI assistant director and Agent Thompson's immediate supervisor strode into the building, their faces set with controlled anger. The local officers scrambled to attention, suddenly very aware of the gravity of the situation. In the evidence room, Officer Reed was desperately trying to delete his body camera footage when the door burst open. The IT technician he bullied into giving him access stood behind two senior officers, his earlier fear replaced with determination. "I've got the backup running, sir," the technician announced. "He hasn't managed to delete anything." The police chief, a man who'd spent 30 years building his department's reputation, looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last hour. He stood in the middle of the main office, watching the security footage from the bank playing on multiple screens. The video showed Agent Thompson conducting her official business, her professionalism evident in every frame. Each moment of footage hammered another nail into Officer Reed's coffin. "Get her out of that cell. Now." The chief's voice boomed through the station. 3 officers practically tripped over themselves rushing to comply. As they approached the holding area, they found Agent Thompson standing calmly, her dignity intact despite everything she'd endured. The cell door opened with a metallic clang that seemed to echo the seriousness of the moment. "Agent, on behalf of this department, one officer began, but Agent Thompson raised her hand, silencing him. "Save it for the official statement," she said quietly, straightening her jacket as she walked out. In the main office, the scene that greeted her was one of controlled chaos. The FBI assistant director was standing nose to nose with Officer Reed, who had finally been dragged out of the evidence room. "Your body camera footage has been secured," the director stated, his voice ice cold. "Along with the security footage from the bank, the witness videos from the parking lot, and the surveillance footage from the station. Care to explain what we're going to find when we review it all?" Officer Reed's arrogance had finally crumbled. His face had gone pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized the full implications of his actions. The same prejudice that had led him to profile and arrest Agent Thompson had just brought his career crashing down around him. The police chief stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Officer Reed, surrender your badge and weapon. You're suspended effective immediately." When Reed hesitated, the chief's voice cracked like a whip. Now, the sound of Reed's badge hitting the desk echoed through the suddenly silent room. Agent Thompson walked through the parting crowd, her heels clicking against the floor, the same sound that had drawn Reed's prejudiced attention earlier now serving as a reminder of his monumental mistake. She stopped in front of her FBI supervisor, who handed her back her confiscated briefcase and credentials. "The bank's security team sent over everything," her supervisor said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "including the audio from your 3-hour meeting about the cyber heist investigation." He turned to the police chief. "Your officer didn't just harass an FBI agent. He interfered with a federal investigation involving millions of dollars." The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Officer Reed slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation finally hitting home. This wasn't just about losing his job anymore. He was facing serious federal charges. As if on cue, phones around the station began buzzing with news alerts. The videos from the parking lot had gone viral. National news networks were picking up the story. What had started as one officer's prejudiced action was about to become a nationwide conversation about law enforcement reform. Agent Thompson stood in the middle of it all, her composure unbroken. She'd known from the moment Reed approached her in that parking lot that this incident would have far-reaching consequences. Now, watching him being led away to face questioning, she felt no satisfaction. Only a firm resolve to ensure this moment led to real change. The police chief approached her, his face etched with genuine remorse. "Agent, I know nothing I say can make this right." She cut him off with a raised hand. "You're correct, Chief. Nothing you say can make it right. But what you do next might help prevent it from happening to someone else." Her words hung in the air, a challenge and an opportunity wrapped into one. By morning, the story had exploded across every major news network. Agent Thompson's wrongful arrest had become the spark that ignited a nationwide conversation. Television screens everywhere showed the cell phone footage from the parking lot, each replay adding fuel to the growing public outrage. The FBI office was buzzing with activity as Agent Thompson walked in, her head held high. Colleagues stopped to show their support, many sharing their own stories of similar experiences. What made her case different wasn't just her FBI status. It was the undeniable evidence that had captured every moment of the incident. "Had you seen this?" her supervisor asked, turning his computer screen toward her. On it was a video of the young bank employee who had tried to help her, now being interviewed on a morning news show. "She was there on official FBI business," he was saying, his voice trembling but determined. Officer Reed wouldn't listen to anyone. He just wanted to believe what he wanted to believe. More revelations began pouring in. Anonymous tips flooded the police department's internal affairs division, revealing other incidents involving Officer Reed that had been swept under the rug. Former victims came forward, their stories matching the pattern of prejudice and abuse of power that had finally been exposed. The police chief called an emergency press conference on the steps of the station. Camera lights flashed as he stood at the podium, looking grave. "What happened yesterday is inexcusable," he began, his voice carrying across the crowd. "But it's not enough to just acknowledge that. We need to take concrete action to ensure it never happens again." Back at her desk, Agent Thompson reviewed the flood of emails and messages she'd received. Support poured in from law enforcement agencies across the country, many asking her to share her story with their departments. But one message stood out: an invitation to speak at the upcoming police academy graduation. She took a deep breath, considering the opportunity. This wasn't about revenge or public shaming. It was about creating real, lasting change. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she composed her reply, accepting the invitation but with her own conditions attached. Meanwhile, the police department was facing its own reckoning. Internal affairs investigators discovered that Officer Reed's personnel file contained multiple complaints of similar behavior, all dismissed without proper investigation. The surgeon who had buried these complaints was now facing suspension, along with others who had enabled Reed's actions over the years. Social media was ablaze with the story. #JusticeForAgent Thompson trended nationwide, but she noticed something more significant emerging. People weren't just talking about her case. They were sharing their own experiences, creating a powerful chorus of voices that could no longer be ignored. The local community organized a peaceful rally outside the bank where it all began. Hundreds gathered, holding signs demanding police reform. But what caught the media's attention was the number of police officers who joined the crowd, standing in solidarity and calling for change within their own ranks. Agent Thompson watched the coverage from her office, her emotions mixed. The incident had forced her to put her ongoing cyber heist investigation on hold, potentially letting criminals escape justice. But perhaps this unexpected turn of events would lead to an even more important kind of justice. Her phone buzzed with a message from the police academy director, confirming her speaking engagement. She would be addressing the next generation of officers, those who still had the chance to learn and do better. As she replied, she began mentally outlining what she would say to them. Just then, her supervisor knocked on her door. "The director wants to see you," he said, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. "Something about forming a new task force." Agent Thompson nodded, understanding the significance. Her experience could help create new protocols for law enforcement interactions, preventing future incidents like hers. As she rode the elevator to the director's office, she reflected on how one moment of injustice had transformed into an opportunity for systematic change. The humiliation she'd endured in that parking lot was becoming a catalyst for reform, her story a powerful testament to both what needed to change and how that change could happen. 2 months after the incident, Agent Thompson stood at the podium in the police academy's main hall. Rows of fresh-faced recruits sat before her, their expressions a mix of curiosity and respect. Instead of anger or blame, she chose to speak about understanding and growth. "When I was put in handcuffs that day," she began, her voice clear and strong, "I had 2 choices. I could let anger consume me, or I could channel this experience into something positive. The room was completely silent, every person hanging on her words. Today, we're choosing the path of positive change together. Behind her, a large screen displayed body camera footage from various police interactions, both positive and negative examples. She had spent weeks working with progressive officers to develop this training program, combining real-world experiences with practical solutions. Look at this footage, she continued, pointing to a scene where an officer successfully de-escalated a tense situation. This officer took 10 extra seconds to assess the situation. Those 10 seconds made all the difference. The recruits leaned forward, taking notes, their faces showing genuine interest in learning. In the back of the room, the police chief watched with approval. After the incident, he had thrown his full support behind Agent Thompson's initiative. The department's training budget had been reallocated, prioritizing bias awareness and community relations over military-style tactical training. Your uniform carries power, Agent Thompson explained, walking among the recruits. But with that power comes responsibility. Each person you interact with is someone's family member, someone's loved one. Her words resonated through the room, touching hearts and minds. The presentation shifted to practical exercises. Recruits paired up, role-playing various scenarios with a new understanding. Agent Thompson moved between the groups, offering guidance and sharing insights from her years of FBI experience. The enthusiasm in the room was palpable. These future officers wanted to be part of the solution. During a break, a young recruit approached her. "My mother faced something similar last year," she said quietly. "But she didn't have the power to fight back. That's why I joined the academy, to change things from the inside." Agent Thompson squeezed her shoulder, recognizing the sincerity in her words. The training program wasn't just about avoiding mistakes. It was about building better relationships with the community. Local residents were invited to share their experiences, creating dialogue where there had once been division. The recruits learned to see beyond their preconceptions, understanding the communities they would serve. News of the program's success spread quickly. Other police departments began requesting the training materials. Agent Thompson found herself traveling to academies across the state, then across the country. Her story became a catalyst for departments wanting to improve their training and community relations. The FBI fully supported her efforts, seeing the value in better cooperation between federal and local law enforcement. They assigned her a team to help develop more comprehensive training programs. What had started as one department's response to a crisis was becoming a national model for police reform. Back at her home department, changes were already visible. The number of complaints had dropped significantly. Officers were spending more time talking to community members, building trust instead of fear. The same parking lot where she had been wrongfully arrested now hosted monthly community police dialogue sessions. At the end of each training session, Agent Thompson shared a final thought that always left a lasting impression. "Your badge gives you authority," she would say, "but your actions earn you respect. Choose wisely which one you want to rely on." The recruits who went through her program graduated with a different perspective than those who came before them. They understood that true strength in law enforcement comes not from power over people, but from serving alongside them. Each graduating class represented another step toward the kind of law enforcement that communities deserved. As she packed up her materials after another successful training day, Agent Thompson reflected on how far things had come. The incident that could have left her bitter had instead opened doors for real change. She had chosen to transform her pain into progress, her humiliation into hope for a better future. 1 year had passed since that fateful evening in the bank parking lot. Agent Thompson sat in her new office, the morning sun streaming through the windows. The brass nameplate on her desk reflected her new title: Director of Law Enforcement Accountability and Community Relations. The position hadn't existed before her incident. Now it was one of the FBI's most important divisions. She scrolled through the morning's report on her computer. Across the country, departments that had adopted her training program were showing impressive results. Civilian complaints were down by 40%. Community trust ratings had doubled. More importantly, officers reported feeling better equipped to handle challenging situations. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. A young officer from the local department stood there, the same one who had tried to help her that night at the station. He'd since been promoted to lead the department's community outreach program. "The new statistics are in," he said, smiling. "Our department's had 0 bias-based complaints this quarter." Agent Thompson nodded, remembering how far they'd come. The police station where she'd been wrongfully held now served as a model for other departments. Their holding cells had been converted into community meeting rooms. The desk where Officer Reed had tried to delete his body camera footage now hosted a transparent civilian oversight computer system. Speaking of Officer Reed, his case had finally concluded. Rather than seeking maximum punishment, Agent Thompson had recommended a different approach. He was required to work with community organizations, learning firsthand about the impact of biased policing. The experience had transformed him. Now he spoke at police departments about his mistakes and the importance of confronting personal prejudices. The afternoon found Agent Thompson reviewing applications for a new initiative. The FBI had created a special recruitment program, focusing on building a force that truly reflected the communities they served. The stack of applications on her desk represented hope, people inspired by her story who wanted to make a difference from within the system. Her phone buzzed with a message. The police academy director wanted to share some exciting news. The latest graduating class, trained under her new program, had scored the highest ever on community relations assessments. More importantly, it was their most diverse class in history. Looking out her window, she could see a community gathering in the park across from the FBI building. Officers and residents were sharing lunch, playing basketball, and simply talking. These monthly meetings had become a regular occurrence, breaking down barriers that had existed for generations. Her assistant brought in the afternoon mail. Among the usual papers was a letter from a young girl. "Dear Agent," it read in careful handwriting, "today at school, we learned about what happened to you, but we also learned about what you did after. I want to be like you when I grow up, someone who makes bad things into good changes." Agent Thompson smiled, carefully placing the letter in a special folder. It joined hundreds of others, each telling a story of hope and transformation. These weren't just letters. They were proof that change was possible, that one person's stand for justice could ripple out to touch countless lives. The end of the day brought a special meeting. Representatives from police departments nationwide had gathered to launch a new initiative. Based on Agent Thompson's program, they were creating a national standard for police training and accountability. Her experience had become the foundation for systematic change. As she stood before the group, Agent Thompson thought about that night 1 year ago. The humiliation, the anger, the fear, all of it had transformed into something powerful and positive. She wasn't just an FBI agent anymore. She had become a symbol of what could happen when someone chose to fight injustice with wisdom instead of hatred. 1 year ago, she began, her voice carrying across the quiet room. "I was wrongfully arrested because someone saw only what they wanted to see. Today, we're making sure that future officers learn to see the whole picture, to see the humanity in every person they encounter." Looking out at the faces before her, Agent Thompson saw not just law enforcement officers, but partners in progress. The incident that could have ended her career had instead launched a movement. It proved that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the most meaningful changes, not just for one person, but for an entire system ready for transformation.